Hello, everyone. I am Adam Bergsven, Project Manager of Circular Electronics Initiative. I'm very happy to welcome you all to this webinar, Circular Electronic Trends Towards 2035. Circular Electronics Initiative is an international network with 29 member organizations cooperating to promote a more sustainable production, use, and management of electronics. Today, January 24th, is International Electronics Day, a day dedicated to raising awareness about the sustainability challenges associated with electronics and e-waste. This webinar is co-hosted by Circular Electronics Initiative and TCO Development, a founding member of our initiative. The focus of this webinar is the new trend report, The Landscape of Circular Electronics Towards 2035, produced by Kairos Future and funded by Dell Technologies, another member of our initiative. I'm happy to present our panel of experts who collectively represent three different dimensions of the IT sector, namely production, certification, and recycling. Today, in this webinar, we have with us from Paris, France, Laetitia Kuzi, ESG Customer Engagement Director at Dell Technologies. With more than 30 years in IT and passionate about innovation, Laetitia surely is a leader for more circularity and sustainability within the IT sector. Catherine Masolia, Chief Operations Officer at WEEE Center in Nairobi, Kenya. Catherine works with sustainability and circularity within the IT sector daily. The WEEE Center is one of Africa's largest ISO-certified e-waste management players. In Stockholm, Sweden, Andreas Nobel, Development Manager at TCO Development. TCO Certified is the world's most comprehensive sustainability certification for IT products. So as Development Manager, Andreas really is a driver for sustainability within the IT sector globally. And also with us today, Olivier Rostang, Future Strategist at Kairos Future and author of the Trend Report. When strategizing the future, Olivier most often focuses on the development within sustainability, technology, and AI. Oh yes, Adam who, you may ask? Me? I'm an expert in sustainable business development with a special focus on circularity. As project manager of Circular Electronics Initiative, I coordinate, facilitate, and lead the activities of our networks, including moderating a webinar every now and then. This webinar is divided into three parts. Firstly, Olivier will present the trend report, summarizing 8 key trends in sustainability that are expected to impact the IT sector for the coming 10 years. Secondly, our panel of experts will share their insights on the report and discuss its predictions. And finally, there will be a session for questions from you, the audience, directed to Laetitia, Catherine, Andreas, and Olivier. Please use the chat to post any questions you may have. You can start already now. This webinar will conclude in approximately 40 minutes. This webinar is recorded for external use, and you will all get a link for the recording in the coming days. So let's get started. Olivier, take it away.
The world today is marked by fast-paced change, as most of us have been able to experience, and this experience not only by individuals, but also by governments around the world. Not long ago, we've been able to read in the headlines, in Foreign Policy, in The Economist, that the era of big government is back. We've been reading about green industrial policy, renewable targets that were, at least in the EU, on track to exceed them for renewable energy. And all of this is telling us, if we look at the highest level, that sustainability is merging with a new kind of field. It is going from, environmental targets to also geopolitical concern and national interest issues. Governments are taking a much bigger interest in governing the transition. Now, this is something that in the field of research around, the green transition in general, has been called resilience, and resilience, the ability of a society or a system to absorb shocks and still function as they used to before. Well, this is it. For the first time in a really long time, this field has merged with the matter of geopolitics. So it's not surprising that we see characteristics of this shaping off, like, for example, chief sustainability officers increasingly take moving closer on the board, moving closer to finance and advisory rather than closer to communications. And this, I think, marks really the transitioning of sustainability much closer to geostrategic issues. And now you might ask, well, because of this increasing geopolitical interest, states are interested in governing this transition. And because of this, there are various competing models of how to govern it. And one of the most important ones out there is the EU, that is growing much more important from a regulatory perspective. Because when you have such a transition on the scale of the green transition, you need to govern it. And you can choose sticks or carrots with incentives or with restrictions. And different governance models have emerged. You have the US with the Inflation Reduction Act on the one side. You have China on the other side, the EU. But what you really need in order to govern the transition is two things, according to legal scholar Andrew Bradford. You need two things. You need capacity to regulate, that is, the formal setting in which you are able to make a meaningful regulation, and then also a desire to regulate, the willpower to regulate. And there's only one entity in the world that currently meets those criteria, and that is the EU. And the EU has both a capacity to regulate technology and consumer electronics and everything around it, as well as a desire. And therefore, we have been working with the idea that keeping an eye out for the kind of regulations that the EU puts out will be an extremely interesting and extremely important trend forwards. And not the least is perhaps the latest example with the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive that most major companies are forced to reckon with. And one of the ways that this transition is governed is by implementing a new sets of regulations that we were just talking about. And this leads us to trend 3, which is tracking, tracing, and transparency on the rise. Now, this is a trend that we, that in the sphere is pretty famous as well, known to many as the digital product passport. But essentially, what we're looking at here is that in order to govern the transition, we're going to need data on materials. We're going to need data on supply chains. We're going to need to know where materials come from, where they're going, where they flow in general throughout the economy, in order to better document and better report. Here we have an example of a future digital product passport that we were kind enough to be able to show here from Circularize, that are blockchain enabled and that really provide some sort of documentation that companies will be forced to report on. But those companies have already been thinking about how to make that data presentable for customers. How can you add value to a product with the kind of data that you are forced to report on from the incoming directives? And that will be one of the major questions that companies will have to grapple with. What to report, what to start measure, what will they need to measure in the future, and what is interesting for consumers to know more about. If we advance to trend number 4, which we call Despite Setbacks, the Circular Economy is Advancing. Well, this is because there is one global entity, as we know today, that catalogs the global material flows, and that is Circular Economy. And according to their research published in 2023, and I think there is a new one out now, 7.2% of the global economy is circular. This means that out of all the materials that we extract from the environment, only 7.2% make it back into the economy. Now, this is actually down from the first measure in 2018, which put the global economy at 9.1% circular. So we are technically, on paper, actually losing circularity. Now, this might be due to many factors. We also have generally a growing global population and are still building infrastructure, so much of that material is locked in. But there are positive aspects here that are telling us, at least, that we might be going in the right direction. First of all, we see double-digit growth for second-hand markets across the world. This is positive because it means that there's both an interest in repurposing and interest in purchasing repurposed products, which is generally, we should be taking this as a positive trend. We have growing citizen movements in the likes of the right to repair, which are mobilizing people around the world to make sure that, well, people have the capacity to repair their products and their devices in general. We have new actors that are fundamentally re-engineering products here. Think about framework PCs or Fairphone that are, building modular devices that can be repaired to a much higher extent than is the norm today. People hold on longer to the devices. We've peaked in, we at least believe we've reached a peak in processing power, and therefore it is not as interesting to change a phone or computer every year. And because of that, there is more of an interest in keeping devices longer. And just in general, we can see much clearer goals and ambitions from countries as this is sort of merging with geostrategic, interests in retaining materials where they are disposed of in general. Trend number 5, everything is becoming electronics. This is not a surprising trend, probably one that you all have thought about before, but it is an important aspect to keep in mind headed towards 2035, that it seems to be going in the direction that all the more products are becoming electronics. Think about scales, think about bikes, e-bikes, electric vehicles, smart glasses. If we look back 15 years ago, there are many more products that have chips today that didn't used to. And this means that we can expect circular or electronic waste to be growing quite massively. But on the other hand, it also helps devices become connected, which means they also become easier to share and rent for different types of business model, which we already see some companies have started playing around with. And this is an example from Fairphone here that have started in the Netherlands, their Fairphone Easy subscription, which basically incentivizes users to keep the phone as long as possible. And the longer they keep it, the cheaper it gets. And over the 5 to 6 year period, it actually becomes cheaper than having bought the phone in the first place. And along the way, they offer repairs and maintenance on the device, which means that in the end, the goal is to maintain the device as long as possible, which is profitable for the company because they don't have to produce as much, and profitable for the consumers because they pay less. These new business model trends are also leading us to trend number 6, which is that ownership is getting serious competition for the first time. We have everything, all the ingredients, shaped for this. We have population density. There are actually acceptable levels now for these types of business models. We have better battery technology, which is enabling devices to actually be connected for a much longer time and therefore used by many. Good connectivity, which is also one of these factors. We have policy incentives. We have new experimentations with business models, openness to these types of business models. Here we have an example from Lincoln Co. that are experimenting with subscription models for cars with built-in sharing functions. IHOPA, which is a Swedish company that experiments with sort of lockers with top-of-the-line electronics for homeowners associations. And all in all, this works because we have a bunch of ingredients properly lined up and for it to work. Now, if it will work, we don't really know, but what we can tell at least is that ownership, or traditional ownership, is getting some competition here. But it raises question in the future about who actually owns the product. If the owner or the user have a responsibility to dispose or pick apart the products or repurpose it, and does it change the incentives for producers to actually produce longer lasting products? That is something that we'll be finding out in the coming years. Trend number 7, AI will help speed up the transition. I'm sure you've tired of hearing the word AI, but there are some really interesting things happening in the sphere. The types of language models that we're developing today are helping robots become not only specialists, but also generalists and able to understand a much more diverse array of tasks in general, and also able to use computer vision to see and understand and reason around the world that they see. And that makes it interesting, specifically for example, taking apart different types of electronics that they're not trained to take apart. So I think we will see some major improvements in this area over the coming 10 years. But not only that, AI has an interesting impact here in able to generate new types of materials with properties that fit. And we've already seen this types of demonstrations both in organic and inorganic chemistry. So I think we will see some sort of increase in the types of materials that are created, and much more importantly, materials that are created on demand and that respond to certain circular criteria. Now, the last trend number 8, we called consumers demand sustainable comfort and comfortable sustainability, because figuring out where the breaking point for comfort is will become one of the biggest questions going forward. Most aren't willing to go above and beyond for circularity or sustainability, but many, if not most, are ready to do some, or at least the minimum. So finding the right balance between, the click to compensate button or the going full-on activism will become something that companies will have to reckon with, and thinking that circularity is still something that is mostly driven from above, from policy, from research, from manufacturers, and not as much from the consumer side. So consumers will need to be to have easy options. We can see this with some data, at least from our studies, at least in Sweden, when asked how ecologically, sustainably do you think you live today, we can see a clear divide between generations. And this tells us that, well, different generations view the questions very differently. Also quite, probably most of us know this, but still good to know. But one of the biggest barriers to living more sustainably was seen as being too expensive, too cumbersome, too time-consuming, which means, what this tells us, that circular and sustainable options need to be made easy and accessible, and primarily one of the cheaper options. And this closes today's presentation.
Thank you, Olivier, for that great overview. I've read the report and I find it really encouraging, as it foresees sustainability's growing role for the coming 10 years. But let's now start our panel discussion with Letitia from Dell, Catherine from WEEE Center, and Andreas from TCO Development. First, a question to all three of you. Do you agree with the report? And if so, anything in particular? Letitia, you want to go first?
Yeah, okay, thank you, Adam. Yes, I think it is a fruitful report that captures major trends. I may come back to one point that you've slightly mentioned in the report about education. A recent Forrester study suggests organizations typically over-provision their storage environment by an average of 37%. So we work closely with CIOs to engage their businesses to reduce the cost of wasteful over-provisioning. So at Dell Technologies, we've made our products denser and simplified data storage to reduce physical and carbon footprint in the data center.
Thank you. Andreas, do you agree with the report?
Yeah, I do, and I especially agree with trend number 2, the EU as a regulator, which as a growing and becoming more important. We can see this, for example, with the USB Type-C port being introduced, forcing large companies to change their product design for the good of the end user, meaning that we will create less e-waste going forward. So these types of quote unquote power moves by the regulators in the EU, I think is great, and will force us into a more circular future.
Thank you. And Catherine, what's your comments on the report?
I found the one where we said everything is becoming electronics, especially amusing, because when we're organizing our Third Africa e-waste conference, we're looking for items to give as gifts to the guests. And we bought water bottles, and then suddenly realized they have a clock at the top. So actually it's an electronic item. But at the point of purchasing it, we didn't think about that. And so we had to put something there to remind people to dispose it. So yeah, that one of everything becoming electronics, I particularly agree with that one. Yeah.
Thank you, Catherine. Also, that leads me to my first question to you, Catherine. As electronics is becoming increasingly integrated in various products, what challenges and opportunities do you see that this could present for waste reduction and circularity?
Yeah, so if you think about just the example I've given, then it means that when an item is brought now, it's more complex. It's not the normal item that you think. So it might have a little battery somewhere inside that you need to find. So it increases the complexity, which of course makes recycling, disassembly a bit more challenging than it normally would be. But of course, it also presents opportunity for us to innovate. And also, if you think about it, then you might find that now the items have more valuable components in it if you're thinking about material recovery. So that might present some opportunities for you.
Thank you. Andreas, you mentioned EU already and its growing role as a regulator. To specify that a bit more, what impact do you foresee that EU sustainability regulations will have on global electronic manufacturers?
Yeah, well, the biggest thing that's upcoming is, of course, the Green Claims Directive, from my perspective, as a sustainability certification, meaning that now manufacturers, or when this becomes, active, manufacturers won't be able to present claims without backing it up with the evidence. So this will be great for the consumers because this will level out the playing field in between the brand owners producing and putting goods on the market, so that we can actually clean up this sort of swamp of green claims that is not true. And this will also play a key role for certifications such as TCO Certified to be that, shining light to verify the products and showcase which ones are better than others when it comes to sustainability.
Interesting, thank you. Tisha, considering that the report highlights changes in ownership models, how might shifts towards subscription, lease, and sharing models affect sustainability and circular practices?
Yeah, so Dell has a service model called Apex. So for those organizations looking to outsource some of, or all of their data center footprint by leveraging as a service models, Apex can help companies right-size IT investments to improve efficiency. So with the ability to rapidly provision additional storage when needed via as a pay-as-you-go subscription model, customers can dramatically reduce the cost of wasteful over-provisioning by as much as 45%. Apex also responsibly reuses, repurposes, and recycles technology on our customers' behalf, increasing residual value of their equipment for future use and removing the burden of end-of-life management, saving up to 53% of time spent by companies on decommissioning and retiring hardware. In a research study we commissioned with Forrester, we found that most organizations foresee sustainability and cost-saving benefits from subscribing to infrastructure as a service. In addition to the business value piece, reducing e-waste and IT carbon footprint are key aspects that Dell as a service business models can help with.
Yes, thank you. Very interesting. Catherine, Olivier and the report also talks about AI in the transition to circular economy. In what way can AI and AI robotics be used to improve material recovery and recycling processes from your perspective? Catherine?
I think I'll go fast. Okay, so when you think about AI, for us, what we did at the WEEE Center once was we called young people who are tech enthusiasts and engineers and software engineers, and they do all that great stuff. So some of them used AI and they helped us understand that we can use it to sort and make our recycling processes more efficient. There was also some use cases where we saw we can use it to optimize our logistics and our operations in the recycling facility. So definitely we saw the useful points of AI. And when you think about robotics, there's hazardous components in e-waste. So definitely we could use that for disassembly of the hazardous components, so that we don't have to touch the toxic materials that are found in some of the e-waste that we process. Yeah.
Thank you. That's very promising, I think. All right, moving on. Andreas, another one for you. How could advancements in technologies like blockchain and digital product passports enhance supply chain transparency, and how could that in turn support the transition to circular economy?
Yeah, great question. So we worked with the development of digital product passports since 2018 in a research project called KEEP, which basically aims to look at what can a digital product passport be. And what we've seen is it will be sort of the prerequisite of reaching the circular future that everyone is talking about. Because if we can't share information across the supply chain with all different stakeholders, it will be impossible to plan for the future based on what materials that is flowing and the needs of the users. So, I mean, this type of advancement of implementing the DPPs, especially throughout Europe through legislation and our upcoming generation of TCO certified, will be key to reaching the circular economy, I think.
Interesting. And my last question is to you, Letitia, before we let the audience come with their questions. But Letitia, yes, how can electronic companies balance the demand for comfort and convenience with the need for more sustainable product design and manufacturing?
Well, actually, I see this combination in several areas. You mentioned it in the report. So the EU as a regulator requires companies like Dell Technologies to track, trace, and be transparent on their ESG progresses. Therefore, I see it as a comfort for our customers to have easy access to information related to the manufacturing of our products, for instance. Also, we work very closely with certification organizations like TCO to make sure our products meet high-level sustainability requirements. And we've been innovating for more than 20 years in circular economy and eco-design to have more sustainable and recyclable materials in our products. Even in our packaging, where we have more than 94% renewable recycled materials in it. Also, customers expect energy efficient solution. So as an example, in 2013, when it was needed 6 servers to do what is possible in 1 server today. And in parallel, we have reduced by more than 80% the energy consumption of our servers. Services driving sustainability. So we have an offer called Lifecycle Hub to fully handle the life cycle of our devices in our customers' IT infrastructure. So we have shifted towards repairability to durability associated with security, because when it comes to handling end of life of devices, it needs to be done with the highest security standards to protect the data. Lastly, I think security is a key comfort for users. In the report, you mentioned AI as a trend, which is a very fair point. Everyone can see the potential of AI, but the risks are real, and therefore we must approach this cautiously. So controlling access and ensuring data isn't leaked is critical to meeting our customers' security and data sovereignty objectives. Dell tailors generative AI to our customers' business, bring more control and secure access.
Thank you. And a big thank you to our panelists so far for sharing their perspectives and expertise. We now invite questions from you guys, the audience. Feel free to ask any questions you have about circular electronics and sustainability. You can address your questions to Letitia, Catherine, Andreas, or Oliver, or the panel in general. And please use the chat to post your questions. Some of you have already done, and so I'm going to read out the first question now. The question is, what trends do we see on preventing end-of-life devices from entering countries lacking the proper infrastructure to recycle them? I think, Catherine, you want to go first on this?
Sorry, my internet was a bit wonky there. I left it at what we see.
I'll repeat the question.
What do we see?
Yeah, what trends do we see on preventing end-of-life devices from entering countries lacking the proper infrastructure to recycle them?
Okay, so we are seeing that a lot of countries in Africa now are starting to realize that they need to put regulations in place. So, like for example, in Kenya, there is a big shift towards EPR, extended producer responsibility, now being enforced. So now that means that it will be as easy as it used to be to just bring second-hand items into the country. And now manufacturers, as much as we are not manufacturing here, when the items are coming from outside the country, they are now going to be held responsible. So quite a number of countries, I think at least 7 so far in Africa, are starting to have the regulations in place.
Andreas, Letitia, you have any comments on that question?
Yeah, I mean, they're also working on updating the Basel Convention on how shipments should be done when it comes to hazardous waste, and that could also be helpful to combat this. But we'll see how it goes.
Yes. All right. Moving on to the second question from the audience. The WEEE collection, the e-waste collection rate in Europe, in the EU, has been stagnant or decreasing even compared to the 65% goal. What can we do more to really close this gap? Letitia, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, maybe I think thanks to the work we are doing with regulators and the EU Commission's asking for companies to be more transparent and to be transparent on information they are doing regarding this e-waste collection. Maybe that will help also to drive up the numbers of recycling components here.
I can jump in as well. I mean, I think more focus needs to be put on the brand owners putting the products on the market, having them do more in terms of take back and taking accountability of the products that ends up on the market. There are some good EPR schemes spread across Europe, but looking globally, it's not as common. So I mean, and engaging with the brand owners, having them look at the take back options and see what they can do when it comes to, as you mentioned in the report, product as a service. As long as they'll see the economic benefits in doing so, they will start doing it. And as the report mentioned, I think the market is becoming much more mature for this type of practices, product as a service. So that would also be an option for why this could go up, the percentage of products that's being taken care of and collected.
Thank you. Next question. It reads like this. I work for a company with over 500 persons using PCs or laptops. We want to have circular IT by 2030. How do they find the best products to start being more circular in their IT use? Who wants to go first?
So maybe it relates to what I was saying with regard to more sustainability in services. So where we are enabling our customers to have more repairability, upgradability, and also more durability in the devices they use. So this is maybe kind of answer I could bring there.
Yeah, I agree with Letitia. I mean, and if you want to make sure that the claims are true, you should look for a credible sustainability certification to back these claims up.
Thank you.
I think when you want to think about circularity, you want to also think about going for options like repair. So if you're going to be able to refurbish those items rather than saying that we have a policy within 3 years, it's depreciated to zero, and so you get rid of it, then already they're going in a circular manner. So I think that might be to start rethinking how you use the item might be a great way to go circular first. And now you start thinking which products to buy.
A very valid point, Catherine. Start with what you have and keep it longer rather than looking for secondhand use in the first hand. Thank you. Very good. Second, another question is, how do we deal with the reverse logistics required for reuse, refurbishing, and remanufacturing before recycling? And maybe the one who starts with answering this question wants to start first by also explaining what reverse logistics is, for if there's anybody in the audience who doesn't know. Does anybody wants to go first on this one?
I mean, can you repeat the question once again?
Certainly, yes.
Yeah.
How should we deal with the reverse logistics required for reuse, refurbishing, and remanufacturing before recycling? And I think it's basically that once you're finished with your IT product, many of us leave them in the drawer rather than giving them to a refurbisher or recycler.
One way to go about it if you're a bigger company is that you could set up contracts with a refurbishment company at the point of purchase of the new product, saying that in 3 or 5 years time or 10 years time, depending on how long you want to keep your products, we will commit to selling these products to you as a refurbisher. This means that they can start planning ahead of the products, of the product flows, and then you will also be held accountable to give these products to the refurbisher when time comes, so it does not end up in your drawer. So that could be one way of doing it, and then they can help you with the reverse logistics, handling the whole process of the refurbishment.
I also have a comment to that. Apropos the comment about, or the trend about more objects becoming electronics. One latest trend is that these delivery boxes have become popular, and that you can retrieve your products that you've ordered from them. But it also opens the door much more easier for actually returning products, and we're used to delivery going one way from the manufacturer to the consumer, but oftentimes it stops there, and it's quite a hassle to send stuff back in general. So I think that's also one gateway through which it can be made much more. It has to be made easier, and just
I agree.
User.
I'll just jump in there also. I think a lot of it depends on context, so I find that question difficult to answer. But I will answer within the context I understand, which is in Africa and in Kenya specifically. So what we have done to help us with the reverse logistics is we have collaborated with different companies. So companies that are interested in making sure electronics are managed safely provide collection points, so that now you can drop off maybe at certain supermarkets, at certain shops, and then in that way we center will go and collect it from there. It makes it easier for us to handle. So when it gets to the top, the bin is at the top, and then we go and collect. I do not know how it's happening there in your countries, but that is how generally we are working with it. And of course, doing a lot of awareness creation about where the drop-off points are, so that you know where to just take it when you're going about your normal business during the day.
Thank you. Letitia, does Dell work anything with reverse logistics?
Well, I think this is the idea of the lifecycle hub, actually, because instead of having these devices going to a refurbisher, we keep it for the customer, and we just update it, repair it, and send it back to another user in the company we are of our customer, right? So then we are answering the question like this at Dell Technologies.
All right, thank you. Moving on to the next question. It's focused on circular partnerships throughout the supply chain, the value chain. Should those partnerships happen spontaneously by partners engaging according to their business interest, and/or do you think that governments and international institutions should play an even more active role in forward pushing for this? Olivier, is there any part in the trend report on this question?
Not really, but my spontaneous thought about that is that, well, like you said, like I said, you have incentives and restrictions, and in general, you have to make things as easy as possible. So I don't think perhaps governments shouldn't be the ones mediating or being matchmakers, but there should at least be platforms made available to matchmake, and those should probably be driven by both private and public.
I can continue on that thought. I mean, just looking at what the EU is proposing on digital product passports, this will sort of be a enabler of this. But instead of saying you guys need to work together, they are saying you need to share this type of information in between each other, and this will sort of open up the possibilities of working together in a lot of new contexts that we're not seeing as of today, because this type of data connected to the product is not shared throughout the whole supply chain of the product. But when it will be available, of course, there will be much more collaboration and business opportunities presenting itself from this.
I agree with that. And when you actually have the data out there on some form of ledger, then you open up the gateway for the Tinder of circular partnerships.
Yeah,
the data, and who needs what.
Exactly.
Thank you.
I think on that one, I would say that for us, our experience has been when the government starts pushing certain policies, then the partnerships start to happen because there's a policy that must be adhered to. So I think certainly government has a role to play and it needs to play that role in creating the policy environment that makes us want to partner and collaborate. And because even with electronics, there's certain components that have no value or they're problematic. So if you don't have the support of government in that ecosystem, then it can get a bit difficult to handle.
Absolutely.
Letitia,
also
your
I
company has a global perspective on this. Do you agree?
Yeah, I agree. And also, I think that customers are driving those kind of interest and transparency that we have to, we owe them transparency on the way we engage with our supply chain, right? So fortunate enough, we have not been waiting for governments or governments to regulate on that. We have been transparent on those for many years now, and hopefully also the audits that are driven for auditing our supply chain, I think they are key also for transparency with to our customers.
Thank you. A final question, phrased like this: do you see urban mining increasing, for instance, reuse of metals from mobile phones? Let's go to Nairobi first.
Yes, we most certainly hope to see it increasing, and we need to have it happening in Africa. So one of the recent objectives is to see if it would be possible to have these urban mining facilities in Africa, because there's none as yet here. So yes, I think it will increase.
And Letitia, is rare metals a obstacle for Dell Technologies?
Well, as I mentioned during the questions at the first part of this seminar, I was mentioning that we have been investing a lot in reusing materials, and so we are innovating each year to make sure that we are even reusing raw materials into our products. So I won't say it's an obstacle, but definitely this is a trend that we want to use less raw materials into our products for the first stage.
And Olivier, is there a trend pointing to an increase of urban mining for the coming 10 years?
It's urban mining was part of in the description of the first trend, which is that emergency politics. And I think the reason for that is there have been very little incentives to urban mine because it's so much more expensive. It's a hassle, and it's been easier to dispose in other ways. But now you introduce a new dimension into this equation, which is the dimension of geostrategic. This is materials that many countries do not produce themselves, and therefore, if there is government funding or incentives to create businesses in that area, then I think you could quite quickly reach a critical mass of businesses or ecosystems in that sphere who perfect it, and then you have the parallel trends, which are AI and so on, which just I think strengthen this tendency. But yeah, it's a slow takeoff.
Yeah. I'll also chip in. I mean, I think urban mining will play a role, but maybe not as big of a role as we've talked about, because the data or the reports that we based these assumptions on are not that accurate when it comes to e-waste picked up in different parts of Africa. And we know a lot about this because we work now for a couple of years with e-waste picked up in Ghana, for example, through Closing the Loop, which is one of our approved collector under a certification called TCO Certified Edge E-Waste Compensated, and their reports point towards that the amount of rare earth minerals is much less than what's been reported on per phone that they are picking up as of right now. So I agree with what you said, Oliver, that it becomes important from a geopolitical perspective to secure these types of materials, but I don't think that the amount of materials are in the numbers that we thought they were from these streams.
Thank you. Thank you all. And as we now approach the end of this webinar, let me just quickly try to summarize and offer some concluding thoughts. Olivier presented 8 key trends that will likely impact the IT sector for the coming 10 years. Catherine has highlighted the challenges and opportunities with increased electronic integration and AI developments. Andreas emphasized the impact of EU regulations on the sector and the potential with increased supply chain transparency. Letitia focused on how alternative ownership models and balancing consumer demands with sustainable design can drive sustainability. These insights together highlights the exciting yet complex path to sustainability within the IT sector. It is a competitive race demanding sharp strategies and bold actions. Success involves reducing emissions, supporting biodiversity, and promoting human rights alongside technical innovation and new business models. Navigating these challenges creates opportunities for business development and a healthier planet. The future surely belongs to those who act strategically and sustainably. Finally, before we end this webinar, Circular Electronics Initiative is a global network open for all interested parties. So if you share our mission, we invite your organization to become a member. You will all get an email during the coming days, including a link to the trend report and a link to the recording of this webinar. However, the full trend report can already now be downloaded at circularelectronicsinitiative.com. Circularelectronicsinitiative.com. Please use the report freely within your organization and feel free to also share it or parts of it in social media. If you do so, however, please mention Circular Electronics Initiative and use the hashtag Circular Electronics Day. Thank you, TCO Development, for hosting this webinar. Thank you, Kairos Future, for producing the trend report. Thank you, Dell Technologies, for funding the report. Thank you, Letitia, Catherine, Andreas, and Olivier for sharing your expertise. And thank you all for listening. I wish you all a very happy Circular Electronics Day. Goodbye.
Awesome.
Goodbye.
Bye.